Okay, welcome back. We are going to be combining a lot of information into this one video here because we're going to be talking about the strategy, about the tricks and the traps, and the master skills for this first question type in the listening section, the main idea questions. Now, the major difference between the reading section and the listening section is that instead of doing each question and task one by one, where they give you a small piece of the reading section to compare with. Instead, with the listening section, you listen to the whole listening file, and then you have to go through the questions. So you have to rely on your notes because maybe you won't be able to remember exactly what they said about everything. So the most important thing for answering any of the questions on the listening section is the ability to take really good notes. Now, with the main idea question, this will always be the first question. So when you're taking your notes, it's probably a good idea. Maybe it's not necessary for you, but just write the word main idea or main or something like that, because usually it will be the first things that it will always be the first things they talk about. However, sometimes, and this is one of the tricks and the traps, sometimes they will start talking about some information which is not exactly the main idea, but it leads into the main idea. So first of all, when you're listening, you have to listen for phrases like today we'll be talking about, or the topic of today's discussion will be. Usually the information that follows will be the main idea. Now, they might give you a lot of different information and you have to find the main idea from that information or create a main idea from the information, but you'll be able to see that when you look at the answer choices and compare them to your notes. Now, some things that you want to be aware of are when they use phrases such as last week we talked about, or in our last discussion, something like that, because then they'll follow that up with some information which is a topic, but it's not the main topic that you're going to be talking about or that you have to discover for this question. However, in a lot of cases, that information is related, and you will see when we get to the tricks and traps that sometimes that information is necessary in order to find the answer. So when you're listening to the audio file, what sounds like the main idea to you, when you look at the answer choices, you might realize that they have a slightly different focus than what you thought the main idea was. So you have to sort of bridge the gap between what you think is the main idea and what the answer choices are that they give you for the main idea. So whenever you finish listening to the reading passage and you get this first question, you have to compare what you wrote with the answer choices. And usually if you take even just decent notes, not necessarily excellent notes, if you take decent notes, you should be able to find the answer choice pretty easily. If it's a little bit more difficult to find the correct answer, you can always eliminate obviously wrong answer choices, and then you'll probably only have two, maybe you'll only have one left. You just choose that one and move on. But if you have two that are left, just compare the information from those. And sometimes the simplest answer is the correct one. You might have noticed that with the examples, there was one where the answer was just a site. They're just talking about one particular site. Well, that seems like a pretty simple answer, and that was actually the correct answer. All right, so going to the tricks and the traps. As far as the main idea, the main tricks and traps that they use is this first one about what we talked about last time was, and then give you some information. That's the main one. The next one is what I call topic stacking. That's when they give you a lot of different information, all of which seem like they could be the main idea, but they just keep on going with more and more. And for example, with the first example, they said, that they're going to be talking about a way to tell the age of some landmark or some feature, and then he says specifically about dating techniques. Today we're going to talk about a particular dating technique, and then they talk about good data is key to analysis. So there was a lot of different things that all could be. They all could be the main idea, and he just kept stacking those on top of each other, and then you'll find that in that particular example, the actual answer was sort of a summary between all of that information. There was the other one, I think it was example 2, where they talk about some site in the Near East. They're talking about, I think, agriculture in the Near East, and then they said, today we're going to concentrate on one site, and then they give a foreign name. This is a lot of extra information that you don't need, which seems important. And of course, since you're listening to the file instead of being in the classroom, maybe the person actually wrote the name on the board, but in this situation, you don't get to see how it's spelled. So that's a lot of information. You might be thinking the name is important, Çatalhöyük or something. How do you spell that? Well, that's not important. So giving lots of information, which is not important, giving lots of different things which seem like they could be topics, and then actually, I think with the example of the hummingbird, they did that one as well. We've been talking about loss of animal habitat, and then you said, now we're going to be talking about the reduced habitat for larger areas. And then they talked about migration. And then she says, and then we're going to talk about the impact of those, the impact on those birds that cover a wider area. And then finally she says, and specifically one example is the hummingbird. Okay, well that doesn't sound like the main idea. The main idea seemed like talking about the impact on birds that migrate in larger areas. That to me seems like the main idea. But then the answer choices were talking about the hummingbird. Okay, so that's an example of where they give you topic stacking, and then the difference between what seems like the main idea and what the answer choices are. It's a little bit different. So you had to choose the one that was, according to the answer choices that they gave. So topic stacking, giving a lot of different things that seem like topics, giving a lot of things that seem like topics, and then the answer choices were actually somewhat of a summary of all the different information. And then giving a lot of information which is completely useless. When they do this, usually the actual answer is the one which is the most simple. And that's one of the tricks as well, I guess. Giving answers which seem to be too simple to be the answer. Well, it's actually the answer. The traps, trying to write down everything that the speaker says. First of all, you might have noticed that the person was speaking too fast for you to be able to write everything down. I'm a native speaker and I can't catch everything that they said, writing it down as fast as I possibly could. Maybe some people are expert note takers and they have their own technique. And as I've linked right here, this is another course not made by TOEFL Excellence, but another course which I think is very good that I've linked there on how to take better notes. So you might want to check that out. The other trap is thinking that the first topic that the speaker talks about is the main idea. That's related to the last time we talked about sort of trick, or it could be about the topic stacking. So it's not always the first thing that they talk about. The biggest trap is not taking notes. Now, some people don't like to take notes. When I was in school, I was one of those people. I felt like if I just paid attention and listened, I would get more of the information than taking notes. And in some cases, that's true. However, with this particular section of the TOEFL exam, I do not recommend using that method. Because you don't have the question and answer period afterward, like you would in a normal classroom. So that's the strategy that's the tricks and the traps there. Now going on to the master skills. All right. So this is pretty straightforward. First of all, follow the strategy like we talked about. Look for those key phrases which are going to introduce the information. Beware of the tricks and the traps about topic stacking, about summary answers, and about giving lots of information. Take the absolute best notes that you can, and then just like with the reading section, if you don't know the answer after about 30 seconds, just pick the best answer and move on. Now, one thing is that in the listening section, actually all of the other sections, you are not able to go back to previous answers or previous questions like you can in the reading section. That's the only section where you can actually go back and redo answers that you did before or check to see if they were correct. But even though you can't go back on this section, if you don't know, guessing is much better than leaving the question or task blank. Because if you leave it blank, then you will definitely get a 0. If you guess, with some questions you might get partial points. With others, at least you won't get a 0, and you might even get the correct answer. So never leave it blank. Always pick the best answer that you can. But you'll see that when you compare your notes to the answer choices that are on the page, this is actually a lot easier than it seems. And the examples that I gave you, as with the examples that I put into the reading section, like I said before, I try to make the examples a little bit more difficult here than they are on the exam. That way, once you go through this course, when you go to the exam, it should seem easier to you than the way that you studied it. That's a strategy for the whole TOEFL Excellence thing. So that's pretty much it. Follow the strategy. Be aware of the tricks and the traps. And, just make sure you take those notes and you will be just fine. So relax. And remember, you're a champion, so you got this. All right, thanks for stopping by, and we will see you in the next lesson. Have an excellent day.